for winners.
There are 7 episodes remaining in this first season of the Fantasy Football for Winners podcast. And in 4 of those episodes, these next 4, I want to focus on preseason average draft positions this past summer. What were they for each position? And how did players do? It sounds very ordinary as I describe it. And I can almost promise, at least I'll find it entertaining, and hopefully if I find it entertaining, you'll find it a little entertaining too. That's how I write. I write things that interest me, and I hope that people like reading it, because if I'm entertained by what I write, maybe people will be entertained by what they read. Same thing with the podcast. So with quarterbacks, what I'm going to roll through are the preseason average draft positions for the top, let's say 30 quarterbacks. I'm going to run through them very quickly. It'll take about a minute. And then I'm going to break down just how odd it was, what happened, because I think it's instructive about how we look at fantasy drafting management next season, and the season after that, maybe, and the season after that. These are building blocks of trying to understand risk reward based on market values. So starting with the QB1 ADP entering week 1 this season: Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, Bo Nix, Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy. Those were 1 through 10. Now, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, based on fantasy points per game, have done as expected. Allen is the QB1. Mahomes is, I think, the QB 5 or 6. He's pretty much, they fit it to that realm. Everybody else, to a certain extent, has disappointed. Not necessarily their fault, but they've disappointed. QBs, top 10 QBs, were highly unreliable when you look at down the line what happened. Lamar Jackson, number 2, injuries and poor play. Jaden Daniels, number 3, injuries and somewhat poor play. Jalen Hurts, number 4. What can you say? A very non-pass friendly offense, and a step back offensively for a team that looked much more dominant last year and even the year before. Joe Burrow at 5, injured for much of the season. Baker Mayfield at 7. Some say battling injuries. I'll believe those reports clearly, but there's probably more to it. Some would say, well, he's had a lot of injured receivers. Yeah, that's true, but there's more to it. And I think Baker Mayfield last year, everything came together for him, but it doesn't discount the fact that for many other seasons, he was a middling fantasy asset. And maybe that's what he'll end up being. And his QB7 preseason ADP, in hindsight, was too aggressive. And going into next season, we really have to wonder, is Baker Mayfield a top 10 quarterback? Bo Nix at 8, solid, but kind of meh. And I don't use the word meh very often. I'm using it here. I think he's the QB 10 in fantasy points per game. A slight disappointment. But if you're investing in a QB 8 in the draft, you're hoping they're at least an 8 or better, because otherwise it's a wasted pick. If you're picking a guy at the QB 8 spot and he becomes a QB 10 fantasy points per game, you could have gotten better value with any number of picks at that spot and waited on QB and probably gotten comparable value. Kyler Murray at 9, nothing more needs to be said that hasn't been said in previous podcasts or in previous years. And Brock Purdy at 10, injuries were his big challenge. So for many of these guys, if you count injuries for Kyler Murray, even though he was injured and benched, you've got Purdy, Murray, Mahomes, Burrow, and Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson. 6 of those guys suffering injuries, some of them also disappointing play to go with it. That's a pretty rough top 10 that you only had 2 safe players essentially in that list. And of those safe players, Mahomes, you couldn't even count on for the fantasy playoffs, or for most of the fantasy playoffs. So it was really just Josh Allen. Fascinating. Then you get 11 through 20. This is, I'm just going to roll through very quickly. 11 through 20. Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, JJ McCarthy, and Trevor Lawrence. Some of these names are probably jumping out at you saying, I got that guy. I drafted May. Yes. Well, there you go. 3 guys on that list who more or less dominated at various points of the season. And May clearly is the cream of the crop of that whole group. But Dak Prescott clearly outperforming expectations. Drake May clearly crushing it. And Trevor Lawrence clearly crushing it. He was doing better than his ADP even before he started breaking through. But his breakthrough these past few weeks has been phenomenal and has pushed him into the near elite realm. We'll see what his ADP looks like next year. It's not going to be as high as, I don't think, top 4 or top 5, but he was clearly one of those guys that if you waited on, you hit pay dirt, basically, especially down the stretch. Now, the other guys, fascinating that so many of them flopped. Jared Goff, I mean, it's hard to say Jared Goff flopped. He's the QB 12 in fantasy points per game. His ADP was QB 12, but again, if you're trying, same thing with Bo Nix. You don't want to pick a guy 12th and have him be the 12th best. You want to pick a guy 12th and have him be at least the 8th best or the 7th best. That makes it worth it. Otherwise, he's a streamer, and you can get a streamer without having to burn a roughly 8th, 9th round pick or 10th round pick on a quarterback. Justin Fields, disaster. He was someone who actually devoted a podcast basically saying, why is Justin Fields ranked ahead of Dak Prescott? That was earlier in the summer, in late July, early August. It made absolutely no sense. I did a whole podcast episode about it. Fields was a clear bust in the making, and it boggled the mind why he stayed in the top 14 all summer. Justin Herbert, offensive line challenges, not necessarily his fault. You can't blame him entirely or even mostly. He's still the QB 11 in fantasy points per game. I will say, though, that if you drafted Herbert at 14, you were hoping he'd be better than the QB 11. And the fact that he hasn't really done that well down the stretch is meaningful, or even in the second half of the season. A lot of his big games came earlier in the season. Caleb Williams, I left him out. I mean, he's been terrific on a number of levels, and he's top 10 in fantasy points per game. I think he's 8th right now, 8th or 9th. So clearly a bargain. Did he crush it? I think getting Dak Prescott, even though it's marginal, and maybe that's not fair to say, Dak Prescott at the QB 11 spot did better than Caleb Williams at the QB 15. You got better value for Caleb Williams at 15. But Dak Prescott in the overall ADP was 103, and in some weird kind of way that ADP works, Caleb Williams' average overall ADP was only 106, only 3 spots behind. So you've got 2 guys neck and neck. Dak Prescott did better. Prescott gets the bump. But I should have mentioned Caleb Williams as a guy who really broke through as well. Jordan Love at 17, a disappointment, injuries to his receivers. What else is new? I think that's par for the course for the Packers. And so Love is someone who has been oh so close to being a top 14 or even top 12 quarterback, but never really had the momentum with the healthy receivers and his own health to be able to do it. Stroud, really rough, confusing. He and Trevor Lawrence and a couple other guys were among my biggest bargains in the preseason that I was targeting. I did not see that coming. I didn't think Stroud would be this much of a disappointment. He is worse than his QB 18 ADP. JJ McCarthy, much has been said. Maybe he would have been a huge success story had he stayed healthy. What an incredible rebound for someone who looked like he was an unmitigated disaster. And then I've already mentioned Trevor Lawrence at 20. Now, finally, the 21 to 30 group. This is where historically, and it kind of starts at 16, 17. I think Patrick Mahomes' ADP was like 16 or 17, maybe 15. Lamar Jackson's was 16 or 17 when he broke through. I'm talking about guys who, when they had their big breakouts, they were in the mid to late teens in ADP. As you start getting into the 20s, there's still that room for breakouts. This is why sometimes you'll find people drafting 2 non-top 16 quarterbacks late in a draft and you have pretty good chance, maybe 30% historically, that one of those two at minimum is going to be no worse than a weekly streamer, someone who can get you 17 points a game and maybe break through. Starting with 21, going to 30, we've got Tua Tagovailoa, Cam Ward, Matthew Stafford, Michael Penix, Bryce Young, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, and Anthony Richardson. Outside of that group, just to mention, Daniel Jones was 31. And right at the start of the season, the expectation was that Jones would start as the starter, but he wouldn't keep the job. Richardson would probably get his share of starts and be more effective. Jackson Dart at 32. No one knew when he was going to take over for Russell Wilson. And then down Tyler Shuck at 36. I certainly didn't expect Shuck to do anything. I didn't expect the Saints to do much of anything on offense. I was completely wrong about that. So there are those guys, down the line, and then you've got spot starters. You've got, Carson Wentz and Quinn Ewers and other guys like that who've gotten spot starts and done pretty well on occasion. But sticking to the 21 to 30, Tua, it seems to be the end of his career in Miami. And he might not have a starting job in 2026. I think he will. He's a live arm. He's young enough and he's still capable of being a good quarterback, I think, in the right system with the right personnel. Tyreek Hill gets hurt early and we never really see what Tua could do with a fully healthy, even slightly declining, but fully healthy Tyreek Hill to go with Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle is not a true number one receiver. He has not acted like a true number one receiver. I don't think that's his deal. I think he's a better beta in this league. We'll see if I'm wrong over time. But I think that bore out. He had a chance to step up. He didn't. And Tua really needed that. Cam Ward has come on really strong. The last I talked about him on the podcast yesterday. I don't want to go into too much more detail, but 2 passing touchdowns in each of the last 4 games. Very impressive. He has been a success story in Superflex leagues where you needed someone like that, consistent 16, 18 points in the fantasy playoffs. It's a boon to get someone like that in the 20s. Matthew Stafford, of course, incredible. I never saw that coming. I thought, well, back issues, whatever else. What did we learn from it? We learned that Devontae Adams is better than Cooper Kupp. I guess is one of the big differences. And Stafford was healthy and was better protected. I think he took fewer sacks and he was just generally in a better position to thrive. I mean, throwing 40 TD passes, that's not a fluke. That happens when you have great receivers, great protection, and you stay healthy and you throw it as much as he does. Even though he's not the big time passer that he used to be, he's still enough where when he gets you 40 touchdowns, it's because he's Matthew Stafford and he knows how to find his top targets. And, the rest is just, the Rams are a great team. What else can you say? I never thought that would even be possible. I thought Stafford would probably be in the Kirk Cousins kind of lane of traffic of rapidly declining talent. So who knew? Some of you did. I didn't. Michael Penix, much has been said about him. I mean, the injury was one thing, but he also didn't really look the part. Bryce Young, so close, but he's just not quite there. There's that up and down that he's facing right now, and I don't know if he's going to break through next year. But he was disappointing at QB 25. I thought he would have a better season. Geno Smith, at QB 26, was, more or less a disaster. I talked about him on the podcast, a lot, actually, with respect to what would happen if. So what would happen if, he gets benched and Kenny Pickett comes in? Is it a net negative for Brock Bowers, for Trey Tucker, and so on? Geno Smith is averaging 11.6 fantasy points per game. Tua is averaging 11.5. Among regular starters, that is, the regular weekly starters, only Cam Ward has a worse average. And unlike Geno and Tua, Cam Ward is ascending. The other two clearly are not. And so that's what we can say about Geno. He was probably the worst draft pick that someone could make at a QB anywhere in the top 30. I hate to say it, at least if you drafted Russell Wilson, You probably got Jackson Dart as a backup in Superflex, or you just saw the writing on the wall and dropped him early. Anthony Richardson, you didn't have to hold on to him. But with Geno Smith, if you're holding on to him week after week, that's a wasted bench spot in hindsight. Sam Darnold at 27, definitely a good kind of pick, but not a great pick. He has not been the kind of fantasy quarterback I thought he would be. That was a big whiff for me. When I look at this top 21 to 30 group, I missed a lot of those. I got a lot of the top 10, and I got a good chunk of the 11 through 20. I think I whiffed on almost every single 21 to 30 in terms of, I thought Geno Smith would be better. I thought Sam Darnold would be better. I thought Bryce Young would be better. I thought Stafford would be worse. Don't even get me started. If you took advice from me on any of those guys, I was way off. Aaron Rodgers was maybe the one I got right. I just didn't see how Rodgers could be successful. He's the QB 27 in fantasy points per game. And, he had a QB 28 ADP. So he was, not the kind of guy you needed to draft. Although, talk about a live arm, like Tua, Aaron Rodgers was good enough throwing to his tight ends in his backfield and occasionally to DK Metcalf, where he was serviceable in Superflex. That's the best you could say about him. So to summarize, top 1 to 10, really, most of those guys disappointed in large part because of injuries. Top 11 to 20, most of those guys disappointed, not necessarily because of injuries. In some cases, yes, but in some cases, just poor play. And then the top 21 to 30 was a true mixed bag where you've got, someone like Stafford completely breaking through, Cam Ward coming on strong late, and you could point to some early season success for Sam Darnold and some occasional success for Rodgers. But on balance, when you take Stafford out of this equation, none of those guys in the top 21 to 30 were guys that you would want to hold on to for the whole season. It wasn't until you get down to, like I said, Jackson Dart and down to Tyler Shuck, that you start to get guys that you could draft, hold, and then, utilize in the fantasy playoffs to some success. Shuck more successful than Dart in the fantasy playoffs. Dart more successful on the whole. That's it. That's the kind of the top 30. It kind of gives a sense of the patterns that develop with these guys. It is not uncommon for top quarterbacks in the preseason to do very well. I mean, that is why people draft based on ADP with quarterbacks pretty frequently. You look at who's number 2. Oh, it's Lamar Jackson. I'll take him. You look at number 3. Oh, Jaden Daniels or Jalen Hurts, whatever. It's very unusual in this case to have so much disappointment with those guys who are must draft guys, where the championship teams, this is the last thing I'll say, the championship caliber teams, generally you could look at about 5 quarterbacks, and I would guess 90% or so, the championship teams had one of these quarterbacks. It was either Josh Allen, or it was Dak Prescott, or it was Patrick Mahomes with a good backup plan, because Mahomes was the QB1 overall for the first half of the season. Or it was Drake May, or you had some combo, and I'm kind of cheating here with the combo, but maybe you had like the Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence. You did a little bit of a hedge outside of the top 14, and you had a couple guys, and you mixed and matched, and you got big production when it mattered most. And I left one out. If you went really deep and picked up Matthew Stafford in, 12-team league, then you didn't really need to look elsewhere. So maybe there were about, 7 quarterbacks that were go-to. Everybody else, you either dropped or you just kind of weathered the storm and hoped they would get through it, and they were hit or miss. That's a pretty rough percentage. And the lesson there is have a second quarterback if you can afford to. Because if you just have one, and I had 2 in my league, I had Patrick Mahomes and I had Lamar Jackson. I've talked about this before on the podcast. Mahomes got me through the first half of the season. And then I traded him away for Jackson Dart and T. Higgins right before Mahomes' schedule got rough. And that turned out to be a good move for me. If Dart had stayed healthy, it would have been a great move. If Lamar Jackson had stayed healthy and or good, that would have been a great move. But in the end, I thought I had two elite upside quarterbacks within Mahomes and Jackson. It turned out when it mattered most, I had zero. And so you never know when you're going to need that second quarterback or even a third in my case. But I would say going into 2026, think seriously. If you only draft one quarterback, usually, and I used to be that kind of person, very strongly consider adding a second quarterback, a young, ascending, even someone who doesn't look like they're going to be great. Add a Cam Ward with your last pick. Or someone of that. If you added Trevor Lawrence with your last pick this time around and, you made out huge, you have very little to lose doing that because after a few weeks, you'll probably know if you want to keep them or not. But we can see what the breakout does and how it changes the game for a fantasy team during the playoffs. I'm BJ Rudell, Fantasy Football for Winners. Follow me on the blog. Email me anytime. Sorry for such a long podcast episode. I guess I'm making the most of it now that we're down to a few left. I try to keep these within about 6 to 7 to 8 minutes. But this is kind of a year in review. So we're going a little long, and I'll be doing these for running back, wide receiver, and tight end the rest of the week. And then we'll see what those last 3 episodes look like. Thanks for listening. I'm BJ Rudell, Fantasy Football for Winners. Follow me on the blog. Email me anytime. We'll see you tomorrow.